Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Marketing Water Cooler Podcast. My name is Jeremy Francesi. Thanks for stopping by. Steph, how are you doing before we dive into things? What's going on with you?
I'm doing well.
Doing
It's
well?
raining here in LA for the first time in like 8 months.
There you go. Get a little rain. Yeah, it's been pouring here all day. It's
Yeah.
a gloomy Monday evening. But hope everybody's doing really well. Thanks for stopping by. If you're on video, thank you. And if you're on audio, hope you enjoy. Steph, what are we getting into today?
Let's talk about using your renewal conversations effectively.
Cool. So look, at time of year, right? We had a team meeting. We broke down the calendar a little bit, which is crazy to feel like, oh man, you got Thanksgiving, which is kind of a weird wash of a week. You get the last 2 weeks of the year, which kind of go out the window. And you just look at the calendar and you're like, oh, wow, we really don't even have 2 full months left. And so when it comes to marketing and, look, if you're a marketing leader, CMO, VP marketing, you're internal, then this conversation, I want to kind of shift it away from, there's a couple things I want you to consider before you jump into the new year, because what's going to happen in the new year conversations related to growth goals, you're going to talk through a lot of things about that really touch on the word and. We've been doing all these things, and now we should do these things. First and foremost, take a step back and look at what worked this year. Both the strategy and the idea. Did you get where you needed to go? But also the tactical nature of what you were doing. A lot of marketing right now is about systematically creating content. So think about the ideas and the messages, but also think about, are we developing a process that's sustainable? Maybe you have an agency and a vendor. Maybe you're building it in-house, or you have a podcast, you have in-house staff, designers, writers, producers, however you've structured it. But before you start going with, and let's now do all these other things, and we need this software, and we need to consider this, use this time before you walk into the new year. We're going to touch a second on where growth goals are, but you got to start thinking through about, did we execute? Were there good ideas, and were there good processes, right? Because no matter what you go to do, if you haven't developed good process, then you're really banking your entire strategy on good and really high quality people. Not that everybody doesn't have great people, but great processes can support a team that may have turnover. Great process can support a team that may have just the need to be agile, right? Because you're trying new things consistently. Great process can support a lot of things. But if you're weighing your entire year on, again, did that idea work out? Was that video good? You're really looking at the year in a vacuum rather than thinking about, is what we did this year serving us next year? Is how we delivered those ideas serving us next year? And that way you can start to look at, what are we getting rid of? What are we keeping? What are we doubling down on, even go further, right? Podcast went really well. Now let's go deeper. But you really have to take inventory of, what did we do this year? How did we do? What sucked? And we just need to get it off the plate, right? Be honest about, we tried this. We didn't have the in-house talent. We need to go outsource for that, right? Or hire for it. Before you start doing, and the main thing I want to touch on is, look at what happened this year. People, process, right? Those things matter. Great ideas are going to come if you have the right people in the room, but you need a systematic approach to deploy those ideas. I want you to make sure you're looking at that, not just what's next on the horizon.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Anywhere we want to dig into that piece?
Yeah. So if we're starting out with good ideas, I'm sort of wondering what is the best measurement to figure out what went well? If we're not talking specifically in terms of like, this one video did really well, what are the measurement metrics that we're looking at?
I mean, look, it depends on strategy, right? Like, look, there's different types of companies from a life cycle and where you're at in marketing. If you came into this year, you have no brand system, no brand guidelines, an old website you haven't touched, you really haven't activated social, and you're in a position where you're trying to set the foundation for growth, then you can't weigh this year on, I would even beg the question of tying it to revenue. Right? Mm-hmm. Unless you had a really, really high intensity of brand system, get situated, clear positioning, clear company identity, brand identity, and you have a strategy of, we implemented organic and paid clear customer journey analysis, clear funnel analysis on what our buyer is, who they are, what their process looks like, and you went all in. But that would insinuate you either have a reasonably sized team or you're spending $50,000 to $100,000 a month on marketing and you're really leaning into it. But but my gut is you're probably not spending that if you haven't gotten situated. So those are kind of two different situations. So step one is, if you needed this year to be getting situated, going from nothing to something, then what you need to assess is, did we get situated from a standpoint of operational efficiency and corporate clarity?
Mhm.
One, when we talk about a brand system, we're not talking about colors. What we're talking about is, if you hire people, if you contract people, and if you grow internally or you partner with somebody, do you have the means to communicate how to interact with your brand across all mediums?
Mhm.
Speed, right? If you hire a contractor, can they interact with your brand assets confidently and do what they do? If you partner with somebody, because now you have a show you can co-produce and now you need to communicate, like, do you have the ability to move your brand into the marketplace, print, digital, wherever you need it, wherever it's being done, in-house or external or strategic partnership, that everybody's playing with the same playbook? That's one. Everybody touching your brand, playing on the same playbook.
Mhm.
Two is, depending on what business you're in, where's your web presence at, right? How many people until COVID hadn't really done a major update on their website for 5, 7, 10 years, right? Then COVID happened. They're like, we have to be digital. They tried to launch a blog and now they're weighing, like, did our blog work? But it's like, the question is, are you designed for a mobile environment? Are you aligning to your customer experience? Do you know why they're coming to your website to support it? Right? It really needs to be something that's a little bit more comprehensive. So step one is, did you create a playbook for your marketing and branding infrastructure, whether in-house or outside of the company, where everybody's running with the same playbook? They understand how to play as a contributor in your organization, however they frame it. The other piece, web matters, right? Obviously, I think that's kind of like obvious at this point. But look, people are going to go to their friend groups, go to their communities. They're going to do their research, and then once they've identified a couple brands that they feel confident, comfortable, and empowered to connect with, they're going to go to your website, right? They can't DM you as a company on LinkedIn, right? So they may hit you on Twitter. They may hit you um, on Instagram or something like that. But the truth is, like, they're going to come through your website most of the time, especially a service provider. So the question is, have you made an update to your website that indicates you are prepared for what you're trying to accomplish? If you're trying to be a demand generation, if you're trying to focus on demand generation and you're creating a systematic approach to organic and paid content, then you have to question if the website's prepared for it. So
Mhm.
brand identity, system, and web presence matters. If you've taken care of those things, then the last thing I would say is, did you leave this year gaining an intimate understanding of how your customer acquires, consumes, and connects with information as it relates to how they buy things?
Mhm.
If you leave this year with those three things and you came into this year with none of those things, you're not all the way there, to be perfectly honest, but you're in a really good spot from a standpoint of, now it comes down to creating a model and a system for creating sustainable content that is adding value to that person and that community. But no matter how good your system is, if you don't have a brand system, you haven't updated your web presence, and you don't know how your customer acquires information, your system can't be so good that it overcomes those terrible problems.
Mhm. Mhm.
So a lot of qualitative, which is even more why you need to be able to talk through this as a team. These are not hard numbers, right? Um, so that's one. If you came in the year with nothing to something, brand identity and brand system, clear update to web presence, website, and general social. Where do you need to activate and standardize your presence? And then the third is, did you gain a deeper understanding of where your customer spends their time so you know how to deploy things? Ideally, you got to step forward, which is creating a systematic approach to content. You launched a podcast. You started doing different types of content, and you put them in motion so you could learn. But you got to have a couple things organized before you can lean into that. Because otherwise you're questioning, is it good or not, rather than does it fall into the standard and our objective in marketing? That's what I would kind of start with. And there's probably one or two things I'm not thinking of that I'd probably throw in there, but those are very qualitative, which is also why when we get into the deeper part of the episode, you got to have honesty in your executive team of what we're trying to accomplish. Because if they think they're going to turn on social and then 2 weeks later you're going to have leads throwing through it, like, you're in a really tough environment to win, which is part of why this time in the year you have to be able to go confidently to your executive team and say, this is where we didn't do well. This is why we
Mhm.
didn't do well. I think we need to expand resources, or we need to find a partner, or we just tried an idea and it proved to be the wrong idea and we didn't perform well, but now we know it's not the right approach. Right?
Mhm.
You have to be able to communicate the ways you fell short and your limitations, as well as how you're going to approach moving past them. Right? So you can communicate at the right level. So you're not going to your board saying, well, organic reach on LinkedIn is up 4,022%. Like your executive team doesn't care about your organic reach on LinkedIn. Right? So you have to find a way to talk to reputation, revenue, and sustainability. And that will help communicate the things that matter. But if you don't have the other things figured out, it's going to be really hard to be sustainable going into the new year, where ultimately if they spent a year on the foundational building, the next year really does need to be, leaning into it. Right. So
Mhm.
the question is, are you ready to lean into it confidently? Um, the second group is somebody here, jump in, Steph.
Oh, well, I'm sort of wondering, how do you know if you're working with the right people, but your strategy isn't working? If you've spent the last year figuring out a plan and it sounded good the whole time, but it's just not doing right. How do you approach that conversation where you're like, we like working with these people, but I think we need to re-strategize essentially?
Yeah, look, it's a hard question. Yeah, I mean, I really do mean that, because I'll be the first to say, if you come into a relationship and you have all of those things we just touched on really ironed out, where everybody has the same brand, system, playbook, so everybody knows what the North Star is from how we can operate online, you have a clear understanding where your customer spends time, acquires information, and gathers resources in their buying process, and you have a strong web presence. If you have those things covered, then the question, it's like, how it's going to take a little bit, but it shouldn't take that long. Right. And I say that
Mhm.
from a standpoint of, like, it comes down to that third piece, which I think I misordered them. It comes down to, do you actually know where your people are consuming information? Do you
Mm.
know what matters to them? Because that is one of those things that, and I've heard other folks say this in the industry. I wish, at top of my head, I wish I could pull their name, because I would like to give them credit, but I can't think of their name. But it's like, when Ford runs a television ad, or somebody runs a TV commercial, you're not clicking the television and it's like connecting you to a dealership,
Mhm.
right? But at the same time, it comes down to how closely do you know your customers. So on LinkedIn, for example, if you actually know your customer, you actually know what they care about, you actually understand intimately the problems you solve, how you come into the picture, then you shouldn't be looking at the data on the back and being like, did it work? I
Mhm.
know that's a weird thing. I know everybody wants data and analytics, but word of mouth matters.
Right.
They may not click the link, but you may have to get in front of them,
Mhm.
right? And so I think it might have been Chris Walker talking about this with Refine Labs. I reference him a lot. He's got a lot of good stuff. But it was like, the reason we don't put out daily contextual TV ads is because it's so damn expensive.
Right.
Right. And it's like, but you can put out a LinkedIn ad every day, contextual to your audience, and run 7 at once against the customer, against the target audience, against the title of the company. Right.
Mhm.
And then retarget people, through Instagram and Facebook from that standpoint. The point being, and he made some great points, but what it comes down to is, like, when you're looking at it, it really comes down to, are we thinking about the idea or where people consume information?
Mhm.
Oftentimes that's the problem. You're thinking about the idea that's so perfect, but you're not paying attention to where business is actually done. It's
Right.
like screaming in an empty room the right thing. It doesn't matter if it was the right thing. Nobody's listening,
Mhm.
right? You have to think about those things. The other piece is just understanding in point blank is what you need to be doing what they're great at.
Mm. Mhm.
They may have the best idea, but if they suck at making video content, you're with the wrong company. Like, I just shoot and calling a spade. Right? Like, ideas aren't worth anything if you can't implement them,
Yeah.
right? Now, if you have great ideas, but the deliverables just aren't hitting it where you need it to be, that's a problem. Maybe you look at it and say, look, we love working with you guys. Maybe we'll hire you guys as consultants, but we need to hire a production company that really knows how to create video content like this, right?
Mhm.
And maybe that's where you need to assess. The other thing is just looking back on, what are they promising you? Are
Sure.
they surprised at the situation? Or are they like, yeah, that makes sense? That tells you a lot.
Mhm.
Right? If they came into the relationship and said, hey, we expect to increase revenue by, are they demand gen or are they lead gen?
Sure.
Right? Like, if they're a lead generation company and they are not generating leads for you, then that begs the question, is a system in place? Have you done what needs to be done? And are they good at what they do?
Mhm.
right? But it comes down to what was the promise. Because look, you're going to enjoy working with people, but they got to deliver. At the end of the day, they have to deliver. So go back to the initial conversations or at points of pivot where you're like, hey, we had to adjust how we work together. What are they actually promising you?
Mm-hmm.
Are they promising you leads? Are they promising you revenue? Are they helping you systematically get prepared for things because you're early in the process? Are they saying we're going to increase your return on ad spend through social? Like, what are they actually promising you? As much as you love working with them, look back at those things and figure out, like, are they delivering on their word? And if they're
Mm-hmm.
not, maybe you do give it another year and figure it out. I'm not saying you fire them instantly. What I'm saying is, like, figure out what they're actually offering you as a value add beyond the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would weigh that, because look, we love working with certain people, but some of the day you got to deliver, you know?
Yeah.
We can go into this a lot, to be honest, but it comes down to, what were you trying to accomplish this year, right? And did you position yourself next year to move quickly, right? And so, look, a lot of this conversation is like you internally. It's like if you're in marketing and you're working with your executive team and you're trying to build things, move things, shake things up, like you have to have the conversation. And the question is, do you have a vision for what marketing needs to be doing?
Right.
That's a real big piece that we haven't touched on. Do you have a vision for what the marketing function needs to be in that company? If you're outsourcing the vision and the path, it's not that you got to figure that out though. The vision, like an external company shouldn't be driving your car. So a real message comes down to the founders, CEOs, principals, partners that may have a marketing manager. Like, are they the source of strategic direction for marketing
Mm-hmm.
or not? It's a big thing to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that both can't work, but you got to figure out what role they play in the company. Going into the next year, back to your original question, Steph, of how do you know if it's not working? My question is, who's driving?
Sure.
If nobody can answer that, then that's a big thing, right? And it's a partnership, right? Because sometimes you're hired to do something for specific functions, and there's such a big ecosystem of marketing that there's like a bunch of vendors and a bunch of people involved in it. So it's not always, but you should be able to say this person runs marketing. So internally, if you're the C-suite, you're an executive, who's in charge of the strategic vision and direction of your marketing and communications infrastructure? You got to know who's doing that. And if you can't answer that, then, or if you say this is a salesperson and their job is to manage monthly, quarterly targets, then I think you need to ask the question, are they the right person to head up marketing? Because marketing, what you start today for a podcast will not end up in your quarterly quota this quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Starting your podcast in October will not hit a December quota, right? So you have to understand, are the right people in place? Okay. What else do we got on that? There's a couple things I want to touch on before we close this one up. So I want to keep rolling for a bit. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on in that framework of the conversation?
I'm also sort of wondering what happens, or rather how to know when you have to have a come to Jesus moment, essentially, and say, oh, this is not working, we just need to part ways, kind of thing. And like how to have that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, one thing is, like, are you looking at alternatives and see something shiny and better?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that'll happen, right? Let's be honest. Everybody's evaluating everything. So if you see something that you think is potentially better, then what you need to do is you need to think about what is or isn't working for you in the relationship and bring it to that next relationship from a standpoint of, look, this is what we tried. This is what did or didn't work. How are you guys going to be different?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What was the question? I just lost my train of thought. How do you know when to come to a Jesus moment?
Yeah.
The other thing is just, look, I do believe a lot of businesses is understanding your gut. You know if something didn't work or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like driving a car. It's going to feel bumpy. Like, you're going to feel like something's not working. Like you don't have an alignment of vision, like something isn't consistent. You don't have the capacity to work through problems. You should be able to feel it in that relationship, like something's not working. And if you as and this is more the vendor conversation, I kind of want to steer this a little bit back to like head of marketing working inside their company of what to do. So the year-end conversation, it's not exclusive to like agencies working with clients, right?
Sure.
I feel like people can know. You know, if you hired an agency and their job was to deliver revenue and they didn't do it. You know, if you've built stuff and you've seen track record and process and say, you know what, we didn't get where we needed to go this year, but we worked through some obstacles. We have a capacity to work well together. They have the capacity to deliver on services that we need and value. And they've shown signs that they can be valuable where they are making promises. You know what? And maybe you don't renew for a year, or maybe you started into a quarter, like, but I genuinely do think most people are in a position where they can feel in their core as a person, this is or this is not working. That's my take, at least. Like when I've had to let people go and when I've had to make decisions, I could look at the proof, but I could also feel in my gut, and I'm like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then we make the decision and we move along. Right. What I think is also worth noting is the person listening to this, if you're a CMO or a VP and you're like, I don't know if, because let's frame this a different way. How do I know if it is or isn't working when I explain to my boss if it worked or not? Because I stuck my neck out to hire this agency. And now my boss is saying, hey, Sarah or John or whatever your name is, what happened with that relationship this year? It gets back to the original piece. What were you accomplishing this year? If you said, hey, boss, if we spend $150,000, we'll create this value, then you have to be accountable to the promise you made. If you set the right expectations, and this is going to dovetail into something I want to talk about, is like marketing is a process. When we talk to clients, we're like, we are your infrastructure. The reason we're not just like, we're your department, it's because a department is just an organization of people. Infrastructure, in my mind, is way more systematically designed. There's a way more agile way of organizing those resources than just, hey, we are now your department. You have a designer, you have a writer, you have a producer, right? Maybe it's semantics, maybe it's not. But from my vantage point, what you need to be able to do as the leader is frame of where is your company in the journey of marketing. I'll give you a very specific example on the sales side that will make a lot of sense here. If you go to the company and say, hey, I'm going to bring in 20 leads a month, and those leads are going to convert 80% of them into meetings. So I'm going to put 15 to 18 new meetings on the book with this, or that's why I'm here. Cool. Do you have a sales process that can handle that much of an increase in demand? What happens? I've literally had this conversation with clients. Great. You want leads. What happens if we put 20 meetings on the book every month with your people? Who's going to handle that? Who's going to take the meetings? Who's going to do the discovery analysis? Who's going to do the storyboarding? Who's going to do the client facing interaction to shape if there's a deal to be made? Who's going to demo the products? Do you have the infrastructure? So my point being, where are you in the life cycle of that part of the business? Do you have the capacity to scale it, or do you need to start? Will Smith has the best quote ever. I think it applies to everything, and it goes to, somebody was, I think it was, this is old too, really, really old, but I love this quote. And it talks about, like, instead of trying to build a perfect wall, he talks about lay a brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid. That's the quote. That's the statement. What I think is important for people to understand is somebody had to mix a shitload of clay and cement, right, to create the bricks.
Right.
If you as a leader in marketing are going to your board saying, we're ready to lay bricks, and you haven't started mixing clay, you're not going to put yourself in a position to be held accountable in a way that allows you to move forward. It's better to look at a company and say, hey, we don't have an idea of anything about our customers. We don't have a brand identity and a brand system. Our website hasn't been updated since 2009. We haven't developed the building blocks that great marketing is built on. And this year, you're going to see a ton of work. I'm going to talk to a ton of customers. We're going to make sure these 3 or 4 things are done. And maybe by the end of the year, we're going to develop a show or a podcast or content, something for running ads that'll put things in motion. But to your boss, we need to get a brand system clear as day. We need to update the website and all of our digital presences. We need to have a clear understanding of how our target audiences, our customers, our buyers acquire information, what their buyer journey is. And we need to build content that's really, really to the sweet spot of that company, right? And then we're going to implement it in a show. And my hope is we get to that by October, but we need to set the foundation. What happens in year 2 is this, and this. Right? But it comes back to, are we setting proper expectations? That's also where we need to take the year-end conversation.
Yeah.
What worked well? What didn't work well? I spend a lot of time talking with clients saying, look, I want you to tell me what didn't work,
Mhm.
right? If we shifted to the agency partner, extra third-party vendor side, what didn't work, right? We've heard what worked all year. What didn't work, right?
Sure.
Like, I know if we work with a PE firm and they're raising $100 million and we help them capitalize 50% faster, we were there. I know what happened. We don't have to talk about it again. What didn't work? What fell short of expectation, right? If we're trying to help you hire by putting out content and you're spending $30,000 to $50,000 a year on job boards, we come to you and say happy engineers are not sitting on Indeed, and then we reposition it and put out content around talent and community engagement to leave comments in the right communities. And then out of 208 resumes that come in, 202 are native from LinkedIn and they never looked at your job board. I know that that worked.
Mhm.
So it's not about, don't talk about the wins, but there is a level of having some ability to talk through, where did we fall short? Our job is to make promises. Where did we fall short? Where could we have been better? Right? I think that's a big part of relationships. Can you have real conversations?
Right.
The other piece is, are you coaching your executive team? So shifting back here, or as a marketing VP, a leader, functional marketing leader in a company, are you coaching your executive team on the support you need? Are you giving them feedback on, look, this is where we're at in the journey. This was a foundational building year. Let's frame it up like that. Next year, my hope is to lean forward. But in order to do that, this is what I'm going to need from you.
Mhm.
Resources and allocation, maybe. A little more trust, maybe. A little bit more of a green light approach to, I need you to trust me to put out content that will work, that I
Mhm.
know will work, that may feel a little bit tough for you to prove. Like, are you coaching your executive team to be the support system that you need from them? I need you to allocate, instead of the $500,000 we do to trade shows, can you give me 100 of that this year? We might go to one less event, but
Mhm.
we need a podcast and I need to do that. I'll do all the work to start, but we need to start somewhere,
Right.
right? Are you using this year to talk about, these are instances along the year where I think we can have been better? Because you also, as a marketing leader, know, are you in a place where you can win? Marketing's got a lot of turnover. You deliver, or you get bounced, right? If you're not coaching up, you're missing a huge opportunity. Huge opportunity. All right. So we talked a little bit about assessing goals, qualitative, quantitative. Are you coaching your executive team based on what you believe you need? Are you taking ownership and having a vision for what you need to do? One other thing to touch on is, have you done an actual formal check-in around the adjustments in long-term strategy? A lot of conversations happen all the time, and not necessarily including every one of the moving pieces in that general part of the company. So what I mean by this is, if you're a VP of marketing or you're leading marketing in a company, your CEO, your founders may have had conversations that just happened in passing that sparked curiosities, it sparked interest. They met with an investor that didn't expect to happen, and they're like, "Hey, are you in this business? Because we don't have anybody in that." Right? Things happen. This goes back to like the analogy of, like, you can get to DC, go from DC to California, and that DC to California may be perfect, but you end up in LA and they're in Sacramento. So it's like, yeah, you ended up in California, but you are not at the same place. This is the time to talk about, hey, how is the long-term trajectory of the company adjusted? This is last what we talked about. Your goal was to grow from 30 to 100 million and sell it to, that's the goal. That's why we're here to market. Is that still what we're trying to do? Did anything change here? It's your
Mhm.
time to align and make sure that you understand the journey you're on. And if something changed long-term, it's going to impact it short-term, right? You don't sell 5 to 7 years later, uh, because you just, oh, now we're going to sell. Like, there's probably a little bit of groundwork, right? Um, on the other side, the same conversation flips short term. Hey, when we started the quarter, here are our 2, 3, 4 top responsibilities, top things we are looking at, top growth, top branding, top marketing, top priorities. Now that we're heading into the new year, maybe we're starting to talk about budget. What are you thinking about? How is your vision for Q1 of next year adjusted? What are you, unpack what the short-term conversation is. Start to frame things. You have to figure out what environment you're playing in. And as an executive, shifting from the marketing leader to the functional owner, right? You need to be thinking about those things, right? Because again, we have clients that instead of an ABM strategy where, they're doing banner ads and stuff, like, we're thinking about, if we launch a show, And over the next 18 months, we interview and build relationships with the 100 people they need to meet, then they're going to do $100 million 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, we're doing really well. We're going to grow. We're going to excel. But we do need to build some real deep relationships, and we need access to certain people. And if we're able to be patient and we're able to really build deep, meaningful relationships, share time with them, let's think about how we can use marketing to build up. That's a conversation you need to have, because it's not going to create revenue in Q1 unless you take a piece and you run an ad against it, but that's intentional. So then there's one thing I wanted, and the last thing was, I would ask your executive, what are they curious about? People are inundated with ads right now. They're inundated with marketing gurus and things that they're talking about. So, hey, what are you curious about? It's going to be a weird question. I don't really see a lot of people talking about this, but I ask it, and a CFO is like, I'm really curious about lead gen right now. We had a couple conversations, and that came out of nowhere, right? But the reason I shared that is, why is that curious? Why are you curious about that? Run down the conversation. See we really do need revenue. Boom. What are you curious with? Curious about this. Here's how it came onto my desk. Here's why it matters. You get to root cause. Now, when you go to them and say, hey, we want to launch a podcast, it's going to take 6 to 12 months to mature. You know the psychology of the person receiving that update from you. You may be right, but you got to know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are you curious about? What's something you've looked at recently that maybe I wasn't involved in, but that you're curious about? Okay. So look, a lot of stuff in this episode, it was definitely, I hope, valuable, but when you really sink your teeth into it, this is a time of year to align expectations internally with your people, learn what worked, not just add on more shit, but assess what do we need to get rid of? Every one of you listening to this or watching this can get rid of some things. Probably we're going to get rid of some things, right? Some things didn't work. Some things did, but you got to look through and say, all right, this worked. This didn't. I could have been better here. Leadership, I needed this from you this year and I didn't. But if we're going to do next year what I think we're going to do, I need this from you, right? Start to have those conversations. And if you're working with a vendor, back to Steph's point of when do you know if you need to let them go? I genuinely do believe in my core that if you are the decision maker and you do not have to sell somebody else on the renewal of that relationship or continuation of working with that person, in your core, in your heart, in your being, you know if it's working or not. You know if there's somebody that's working hard for you, that has good strategy, good intent, sound experience, which drives sound judgment. I do believe in your core, you have the capacity to feel that out. If you don't have the capacity to feel that out, then one, I'm curious if you know what you're looking for. And that's where you may be a little bit fish out of water, but you're like, I don't know if it's working. But that tells me you don't know what you're looking for. That tells me you're outsourcing your compass and you're hoping they give you a true north, when in reality, you do need to, even if they're an expert in something, you do need to know what north is. You have to have an idea of what forward looks like. That will make it hard for you to figure it out, because everything sounds good in the meetings. All the content looks good. But if your goal at the end of the day is revenue and all they're giving you for metrics is views, you have a misalignment of accountability. And so there's probably more to this. I wonder if we'll do a part 2. We may not, but those are some of the things that come to mind. Let's use the time effectively. I don't know when this episode will go live. Is this a November one?
Yes, this goes live. Not next week, but the week after. Beginning of November.
Okay. So look, if you're checking this out beginning of November, like you're thick of budget season, most likely, where you're looking at where are we spending, where are we cutting, what are we doing? Number one, I would say, is consider all the software. Do you need it all? Just straight up, do you need it all? Is there things you can do with what you're already spending that can be more cost effective? Think, what can we get rid of? What can we keep? What worked? What didn't? And then have really radical, honest conversations with leadership around where you fell short, where you anticipate leaning forward, what you think you need to do. Have a plan, have a strategy, have key assumptions outline of these are things we're doing, right? That's one thing I love working with our private equity clients is a lot of what they talk about is like, this is everything we're working on, but here are the key assumptions. It's okay to make assumptions, but it's what are they, and are they controlling the strategy, or are they just something to be mindful of? Share that with your executive team. And if you're a founder, you're an executive, you're running the company and you have a marketing person or a team, and you're like, what is happening down there? you should be able to ask somebody for a blueprint as to how today's behavior maps to revenue, reputation, and market share tomorrow, or talent acquisition. Like there has to be some game plan there. So hope this was helpful. If it was, would love the feedback. I'm excited for season 2 for us to lean into some guests and kind of fold some things in. I think it'll create a little bit of a ripple back through a lot of these. Steph, anything else? Anything you wanted to dig into? I think I hit most of the things that I wanted to touch on. There's probably some I missed, but ain't that how it goes?
Yeah, I think, it seems like it really just boils down to, what were the goals that we set? Did we meet them, or are we at least on the right path towards them? And were we in conversation the whole time on where we were on that path? Yeah.
I really do think it's underestimated, and maybe this is its own episode, but where is your company at in the journey of marketing? There's life cycles to things, right? There's life cycles to things. It's like think about building a sales force. You hire one person, like you may not be ready to hire 20 people.
Sure.
Do you have the systems you need, the process, let alone onboarding and scripts? Like marketing is no different, and so I think it's okay to look at it, but I think great leaders are going to look at it and understand that things don't turn overnight, but the person driving and managing that part of the company, they need to have a clear understanding of where today takes them to tomorrow and how that serves them in the whole view of things. Right? Because the biggest thing I see is where the things fall short is companies are starting to try to run ads and they're trying to lean into things and they haven't done some of the basics, right? Like you're talking about generating leads, but your website hasn't been updated in 2 years, right? And when I say update, let me just be clear before we tie up and Steph is like, Jeremy, shut up. We need to close out the episode, right? Like what I'm talking about is sure, maybe you sell products or something like that and you've updated a service or two. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that over half of the people if you're running Facebook ads and they're on a mobile environment and they go to your website and it's not mobile optimized, but you have a new product listed or a new service, that's not updated, right? So it's like
usable from wherever you get it.
Right. So like, your CFO may be saying we need to lower operating costs and increase revenue and return on investment. And then your CEO wants growth as well. And then your head of marketing is like, yeah, but we need to invest in prep the website. And I'm not saying that because all we do is we don't always websites are a piece of what we do. But my point being, it's an easy example of saying they want revenue, they want leads, they want conversion. The first thing you may say is, okay, I just got hired. We need to run ads. We need to do things. But you have to be able to stand strong and look ahead and say, we need to get situated, because then once we start pouring money into this, I know it's able to take it, right? You might need to get there faster, but if you got to move 100 people across the water, you don't get a canoe. It's faster to build, but it ankles stay above water, right? All right, that's all I got. Steph, anything else to close out?
Nah, I think we covered it. Yeah.
I think we covered it. All right, love you guys as always. We'll be back for more. Thank you for stopping by. Hey, thanks so much for sticking around to the end. If you liked the video, smash the like button and hit subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the new episodes. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We will fold them into future episodes and make sure that you get the help and the answers you're really looking for all things marketing and communications.